Palmer caught the weightless, foamy basketball. He turned it in his hands to look at Nipper's name in broad marker. He tossed the ball back to Dorothy. Nipper chuckled down at them from the curtain rod. It was only a sock, said Dorothy. Why do you keep worrying about it? Palmer got up and paced back and forth. I'm worrying because in 13 days I'm going to be 10. And in 28 days after that, it is Family Fest. And then it won't be a sock anymore. No one spoke for a while. Nipper flew on the basket rim. Palmer paced. At Dorothy said, tell them. Palmer looked at him. Huh? Tell them. Tell them what? Tell them you don't want to be a ringer. You're not going to be a ringer. Palmer stared. Tell who? Dorothy stared back. Suddenly a huge grin broke across her face and threw out her arms. Everybody! Palmer glared at her. He sneered. Yeah, right. Dorothy jumped down from her usual perch on Palmer's desk. Okay, then. She said, how about if I tell them? She bolted for the window and threw up the screen, leaned out the porch, and Ruth yelled, Hey, everybody! I have an announcement! Palmer yanked her back into the room and slammed down the screen. He stood red-faced, fuming. Dorothy wiggled and giggled out of his grasp and went to play with Nipper. Palmer shut the window and locked it and pulled down the shade, but he could not shut out the cold, wet feeling he had just peeked into his future. When he turned back to Dorothy, he found her wearing an impish grin. So, she said, are you going to invite me to your birthday party this year? Palmer sagged. He had been dreading this. So far, his social life had been nearly divided in two separate relationships, one with Dorothy, one with the guys. Dorothy herself helped keep it that way by avoiding him whenever the guys were around. Last year, except his mother's complaint, it had been fairly easy not to invite Dorothy. This year was hugely different. Dorothy was now his best friend, the only person with whom he shared Nipper. How could he not invite her? And, well, how could he not invite the guys? Well, said Dorothy, maybe I won't even have a party, he said. But he knew he would, because the guys were already talking about it. They were expecting it, because his strategy for surviving this summer was simply this: stay on their good side. It was becoming harder and harder to do, for in the recent weeks, Palmer had come to realize that, with the possible exception of Henry, the guys whose company he had once craved he now feared. If they ever found out for sure he was a traitor, Farquhar's treatment would feel like a baby's play compared to what they would do. He imagined them torturing him until he had led them to his forbidden pet. And yet, at that point, Nipper was as good as dead. So when his mother at dinner one day said, Do you want to have a party this year? Palmer's answer was, yes. After a long pause, his mother said, Okay, but you have to invite Dorothy too. Palmer shrugged and nodded. Sometimes the effort of getting through each day left him feeling heavy and dopey at dinner time. He wished he could just go to bed and not wake up until September. Then, his mother, sprinkling salt on the baked potato, said ever so casually, You don't happen to know anyone looking for a lost cat, do you? Instantly, Palmer was alert. No, why? Oh, she said. I've noticed one around the last few days. Did a spider just walk up across your shoulders? Around where? Backyard, around the side. That was yesterday. Today I found it inside, on the stairway. Palmer's heart pounded in his chest. What color? Yellow, she said, reaching for the pepper. She said more, but he was not hearing. He was racing upstairs, bursting into his room, finding Nipper, healthy and plump, and waddling across the floor to meet him. He fell to his knees and pounded his fist again and again into his thigh. Although she insisted she would be there right up to the last minute, Dorothy did not come to Palmer's party. Neither did his mother. I'll leave you and your father to deal with your hoodlum friends this year, she said, and went off shopping. The guys were thrilled. They had learned about the Sharpshooter Award, and to them, Palmer's father was a big hero on the battlefield, like a battlefield general. They kept running back to the den, look at it, touch it, touch the trophy. They flung him with questions. Is it real gold, Mr. LaRue? How many pigeons did you shoot? Can we see your gun? At the dining room table, Beans gave a speech about himself and his hatred for pigeons and how many necks he intended to wring. He called to Palmer's father, who was in the kitchen planting candles on the cake. I bet you hate them dirty birds even more than me, don't you, Mr. LaRue? Palmer's father came into the doorway. He looked directly at Beans. He smiled. No, he said. I don't hate pigeons. Never did. He returned to the cake. The empty look on Bean's face indicated the answer had reached his ears, but no farther. He called, Were you a ringer, right, Mr. LaRue? I was. And now Snots is too, huh? How about that? The reply from the kitchen came a long pause. Palmer decides for himself. It's up to him. Palmer gaped at the doorway. And Beans thumped his fist on the table and growled, Where's the grub? Like everyone else, Palmer had ate his ice cream and cake, but he wasn't hungry. He opened his presents, but he did not enjoy them. On this day he had dreaded for so long, had no appetite for anything. As everyone belted out happy birthday, Palmer stared at the man marching in with the cake and tried to imagine him pulling the trigger again and again. Gray feathered nippers fell from the sky. The cake was placed in front of him, and Palmer found out that he could neither move nor breathe. The heat from the 10 tiny flares burned his face. In plump, shimmering shapes of the candle flames, he saw the ghosts of 10 pigeons. Blow 'em out, someone squawked. Palmer squeezed his eyes shut and blew them out. Outside, after the party, they went in search of Farquhar. When Palmer recalled last year's treatment, he could hardly believe his own memory. Pride, honor, little kids lining up to touch him, his devastated arm. True, last year he felt the same terror he felt now, but he knew that after Farquhar's 10 knuckles this year, no pride and honor awaited him, only pain and uselessness. To his great relief, they could not find Farquhar at dinner time, and the boys split up, and Palmer returned home. He fed and played with Nipper. He did not feed himself. He received a happy birthday phone call from Dorothy. Dusk was falling outside when the twinge of hunger sent him to the kitchen. He found the leftover cake, half covered, sitting at the top of the refrigerator. He got it down, set it on the table. He lifted the cover and gasped aloud. Finger-leathered in chocolate icing, the side of 2-layer cake was a single word, tonight. Henry, thinking back, Palmer recalled that as the gang was leaving the house the afternoon, Henry had rushed back in, claiming he had forgotten something. Henry, whose streak, unlike Beans, was meek, not mean, who ran with Beans and Yodo, who did what they did, but was different, who Palmer had seen one day pulling his little sister around the block in a wagon. Henry had done it. Fingered the word into his icing, tonight. It was a warning. Something was going to happen. Something not good. But what? So he smeared over the word with the dinner knife. Palmer thought about it. The only place to be at tonight would be in his room, in bed. If something bad were going to happen to him, that's where it would have to be. It must be something to do with Beans and Mutto, or the cat. Or the cat had already been slipped into the house. Maybe this time, tonight, they would slip themselves in. They had already done so. And lately, Beans especially had taken an interest in Palmer's room. Palmer, acting put out with his parents, kept insisting they were not allowed to have visitors upstairs. This, however, was not prevented Beans from climbing the stairs to the bathroom no fewer than 3 times during the party. Palmer considered phoning Henry and asked him directly what felt risky. Left to his best guess, he decided the warning meant that he was going to have visitors that night. Considering the guy's recent suspicions, it did not take a genius to figure out that they were supposed to visit with a certain feathered roommate. He went upstairs to feed Nipper, who had returned his daily wanderings. While the pigeon protect the nacho pieces, Palmer sat on his bed to think the whole thing through. It occurred to him that he could close the lock on his window and thus keep them out. It was a simple solution, but it also created two problems. The guys might bang on the window all night until Palmer answered, foiled at Palmer's window. They might get in other ways, other windows. They might wake up his parents, and most important, with the window closed on a hot summer night and no one answering their taps on the pane, they might well come out more suspicious than ever. No, the window had to stay open. He had to let them in. And that meant, of course, that Nipper could not be in the room. Neither could Palmer. He thought about it. They would go downstairs. They would hide in the dark. He did not think the guys would search the whole house. The target was his bedroom, and that they could say next, and what they could say next day is Beans asked him where he was last night. He could say it was too hot in his room, so he slept downstairs on the sofa, or better yet, stayed overnight at a relative's. The moon was beaming outside the window when a happy thought came to him. The whole thing could turn to his favor. Once they saw for themselves that there was no pigeon evidence of a pigeon, they might drop their suspicions. They might believe him. They might back off. So maybe, crazy as it sounds, this was a good thing coming. Palmer had no trouble staying awake in the dark. It was too nervous to sleep. At last he heard his parents' footsteps coming up the stairs. 10 minutes later, the bright crack under his bedroom door went dark. He waited until he thought they were asleep. He turned the flashlight on, brought up the night. Nipper was up his usual spot in the closet shelf. When he left, the light beam struck the eye facing Palmer, went from the buttonhole slit to an orange button. Otherwise, the bird did not move. This was normal behavior, Palmer knew. Nipper would be easy to handle. When he settled down to roost, he went to a dopey trance, and firecrackers could not disturb him. Palmer stood on his chair, and then cupping his hands, gently lifted his forbidden pet from the shelf. Hiding both the pigeon and the flashlight was tricky, but Palmer managed to tiptoe downstairs without waking up the house. At first, he sat on the sofa with Nipper in his lap, still feeling unsafe. He went behind the sofa, turned off the flashlight. In utter darkness, he felt himself to be nothing but ears and fingertips. He could feel Nipper's heartbeat putting away behind the toothpicks, his ribs, tiny motor scooter. He could feel the cold, golden gaze of the trophy pigeon 2 rooms away. The silence of the house at night was not total. Somewhere a clock was ticking. Cricks and creaks came from nearby in the distant quarters, as if the house was twitching in its sleep of its own. Palmer tried to aim his hearing upstairs. He held his breath as long as he could, listening. Was that the window screen opening? A footstep? He pictured them in his room, shadowy, dark upon dark. Bean's penlight, like a starflake, moving in the darkness, pointing at a bed. He's not here. Pointing under the bed, shining the bookcase, the basket rim, the desk, the closet shelf, the empty closet shelf, the closet. Oh no, not the floor. The honey crunches. He'd forgotten to bring them downstairs. Would they see them? Would they figure out cereal was for Palmer for snacking? Or would they guess the real reason? He thought about going up, because maybe they were not there. Racing up the stairs, grabbing the cereal box, and racing back down. 10 seconds was all he needed. He could do it, but what if they were there? What if the creak he just heard? He stayed put. He crouched and cringed behind the sofa. Of neither furniture nor darkness was enough to hide him. He stayed through the 1,000 tocks of the unseen clock, another 1,000 bonging in his heart, and only when he heard from behind the house 2 sharp, quick yelps did he know for absolutely sure that they had been there. And even then he waited for another 1,000 tocks before he allowed himself a deep breath, and at last